I believe it was nobody but the Lord that placed upon my heart at that time to be true to the scripture that says, honor your father and your mother, for this will add length to your days. And so it was in the 8th grade at about 14 years old that I decided I would not allow other people to influence my opinion concerning my father. And I would allow, or I would make sure that no matter what he did, whether good or bad, that I would honor him and acknowledge him as being my father. And that really changed.
What's happening, y'all? This is Mike D with Black Fathers Now, where we're bringing the village to the brothers. Every couple of weeks, you can look forward to a quick inspirational message or a thought-provoking guest with knowledge and wisdom, all geared towards helping you be the best father that you can be. We're bringing the village to you. Now it's your turn to do something with what you learned. All right, y'all. Let's go. What's going on, fellas? This is Mike D with Black Fathers Now, and we got a great one today. We got a great episode. We got a dynamic brother on the line today with us for this particular episode. And this brother is none other than my pastor, Derick Wakefield. And Derick Wakefield hails from Terre Haute, Indiana. He's a husband, a father of 2, a grandfather of 3, right?
3.
Yeah, grandfather of 3. Just a dynamic brother, man. He's been the pastor of Freedom Fellowship Christian Church for,
20 years in September.
20 years in September. Wow. And he's been impacting lives here. He's also in the reserves too. Aren't you in the
Tennessee Air National Guard?
Tennessee Air National Guard. I mean, brother got a lot going on, right? And but he's a dynamic brother, man, with a message, and he also has a unique story when it comes to fatherhood. And so I wanted him to come on and kind of share his experience, share some of his wisdom, and just help to impact the lives of the brothers that are here. So without further ado, fellas, let's welcome my man, Derick Wakefield. How you doing, Pastor Wakefield?
I am doing excellent. And Mike, I want to first thank you for this podcast, because Black Fathers Now, this is an important topic and subject for us to discuss, especially when we take a look at the plight of the black family. And a lot of it is due to the fact of absentee fathers. And so for black fathers in particular who are doing the best that they can to parent their children, we want to give them the tools and equip them for that responsibility. So thank you for that. And then also thank you for having me or making me a part of this. I'm definitely honored to be with you on today.
No doubt, man. I appreciate it. And, I gave you a little intro there. I mean, is there anything else you'd like to kind of add, any gaps you need to fill in regards to your intro? And I know you need to do some shout outs too. So,
well, yeah, of course, being a husband and a father, I do thank God for my wife of 28 years, Toretta Wakefield, and then our 2 sons, Jeremy and Justin. And as a result of Jeremy's unions, he has 3 children that are grandchildren, Phoenix, Aspen, and Kingdom. And they've been a tremendous blessing to our lives. And so we definitely give a shout out to them.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And so we mentioned you're from Terre Haute, Indiana, and and I also mentioned that you have a story as well. Talk a little bit about your background, man.
Yeah, I'm thankful and grateful to God to be able to talk about my background and my experience. I don't have an opportunity to share it a whole lot, or maybe I don't take advantage of opportunities given to me to share it a whole lot. But when you look into my life and into my background, my mother and father, they were married for a brief 6 years. And I'm the oldest of 4 children. I have 3 younger sisters. There's only 5 years difference between me as the oldest and my youngest sister. So wow. We're stair steps. And me and the oldest girl, we were born prior to my mother and father's union. And then they were together for a brief period of time before they divorced. And so we'll talk about the effects of their divorce upon our lives and how that was a long-term effect. But when my mother and father were together, I was thankful for the discipline that my father instilled in our lives, because he was a very principled person and he wanted to make sure that we were people of integrity. So I remember his presence in the home and in our lives and instructing us when it came to what was right and what was wrong. I said I was 9 when my mother and father divorced, and then our life really fell apart at that point in time because my mother and father were working. We were probably a low middle class family or middle class, and after their divorce, we lost everything. My mother quit her job. My father lost his job. We had to move out of our home. Our car was repossessed. My mother ended up being on federal assistance. And when later on I discovered that part of the problem was some decisions that my father had made in his young adult life when he experimented with drugs. And it had a lingering effect upon him. And later he was professionally diagnosed to be a paranoid schizophrenic. And so I wanted the people that are listening to hear the context, because when I look back on my father and his interaction in our lives, and then I look at the plight of fatherhood in the black community in particular today, I really have to commend my father, although he was not perfect. He wasn't perfect, but he was present. And that was extremely important, more than what I realized at the time. One of the areas that I'm hoping that there are some women that's listening to this podcast as well, because one of the discouraging aspects of my upbringing was that there were some women in my extended family that often discouraged me from having a positive relationship with my father because of some of his irresponsible behavior and bad choices. And so I became embarrassed to acknowledge that my father was my father. Unfortunately, one day he got wind of that, and he didn't chastise me in any way, but he made me aware of his awareness, that I was ashamed of him. And I believe it was at that time I was in the 8th grade. I was in middle school, and I was embarrassed and ashamed that I was ashamed of him in public. And I believe it was nobody but the Lord that placed upon my heart at that time to be true to the scripture that says, honor your father and your mother, for this will add length to your days. And so it was in the 8th grade at about 14 years old that I decided I would not allow other people to influence my opinion concerning my father. And I would allow, or I would make sure that no matter what he did, whether good or bad, that I would honor him and acknowledge him as being my father. And that really changed my life. Just making that change of mind and having that change of heart, and it improved our interaction and relationship. So that was the main thing. And then I can recall specific instances when my father just taught me important lessons. And remind you that this is a man that has been professionally diagnosed as being a paranoid schizophrenic. So mentally, he's not really all there. But there was a time when an uncle, my great uncle, his uncle, who was known to be a hustler, because I was raised during the time when Shaft was real popular and all of that. And so a lot of black men in particular, and not only Shaft, but there was another movie.
Not like the Mac or something, one of the blaxploitation.
Yeah, blaxploitation movies. And so people were really, black men in particular, wanted to model themselves after pimps and hustlers. Superfly, that's what I was talking about. Superfly.
Ron O'Neal.
Yeah. So
a little before my time, but I can still understand. I watch Superfly.
So, a lot of black men were fashioning themselves or imitating the behaviors of pimps and hustlers. And my great uncle was one of those individuals. And I thought he was doing me a favor. I struck a deal with my grandmother. My grandmother, because this was after my mother and father divorced. My father lived with his mother. And so when we would visit him in the summer, we would stay with my grandmother at her home, and I wanted a way to make some money. And at this time, I'm like 9 or 10 years old. And so she said that I could use her lawnmower to cut yards to make money for the summer. But I had to promise 3 things: that I would cut her yard for free, of course, because I was using her equipment, and then make sure that I kept the lawnmower gassed up, and that I also purchased the oil. And so that was the deal. Well, then my uncle comes down to visit, and he sees me cutting my grandmother's yard, and he gives me $5. So I'm excited because I'm getting paid for a job that in my mind I did for free, although I did benefit in other ways. My father saw that and became irritated with that and made me give the money back. He made me give it back for 2 reasons. Number one, he said, really, you're already being compensated for the work that you're doing. So because of the agreement that I had with my grandmother. But then he also knew the intent of my uncle, which was not a good one. And he said, he made me give it back, and then he said to my great uncle, my son is not for sale. And so that stuck with me, and it has benefited me tremendously, especially in the role that I serve in now as a senior pastor, because there's temptations that come like that, where people try to buy you and your integrity, and you have to stand firm on your principles. And so that experience often comes to mind when my dad said, my son is not for sale. And I was probably 10 at the time that occurred, and I'm 52.
Wow.
And I can recall that with clarity. And those were that was one of the lingering lessons that I learned from my father.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about your experience, because you hit on so many things that are so important for us to really consider. The whole concept of, someone that's present yet they're not perfect. And because being present is so much more important than being perfect. For one, none of us are perfect. That's one. But then the whole concept of being able to learn lessons through an imperfect being, right? It's kind of like the message versus the messenger. Like, some people discount the message as being said because they don't like the messenger, or because they see the flaws in the messenger. Whereas you, at a certain point, and this might have been after that, you made the commitment to not allow other people's perspectives or perceptions of what was going on with your father impact your mindset and how you were viewing your father. So it allowed you to then get over the concept of the imperfection of the messenger and get to the message. Because, to your point, one of the lessons that you've learned at the age of 10 that you carry with you now 42 years later is the whole concept of my son is not for sale came from an imperfect being. And had you not made the commitment to have the mindset of, I'm not going to allow other people's perspectives of him to taint my perspective and love and honor for my father, then you might have missed out on that particular message, which is carried with you 42 years later. I mean, that stuff is powerful. Like, we get so caught up sometimes in the imagery of wanting things to be perfect, but the reality is nobody is perfect.
Exactly. And I always thought that was erroneous thinking. I would listen to people who were, say, teenagers or venturing into young adulthood and started drinking alcoholic beverages. And then they would have an alcoholic relative tell them not to drink. And their response would be, who are you to tell me that I shouldn't drink and you're an alcoholic? And they would discount whatever was said. And I would look at that and I said, I think that that's erroneous thinking, because I believe that person is speaking from their own personal pain, that they have experienced alcoholism and the effects that it's had upon them, their health, their relationships with others, and they are trying to protect individuals from experiencing the same. And I think it's a way of saying, learn from my mistakes, not only from the good things that I've done in my life, but don't let my mistake become your mistake. Learn from my mistake so that you don't have to repeat this experience. I'm telling you from my own personal pain, this is not the way to go.
And that's actually powerful, because that actually it to me is a lens into individuals in a way that sometimes we look at someone's actions and think that there's no morality in that particular person because maybe they make bad decisions or they don't, do things correctly. And I think about different examples, like you'll see, scenario after scenario of like in gang culture, right? Where there might be some gang stuff going on and maybe some of the OGs or some of the older gangsters, the original gangsters, so to speak, a lot of times they can see maybe there's some potential in a little kid, and that little kid wants to kind of get down with what they're doing, and they're like, no, man, you go on to the football field. Yeah. Stay away from what we got going on, in the sense of, yes, we're still breaking the law, we're still doing things that might not be savory, but yet we also see some potential in you, and you don't need to come down this road.
Correct.
Because so it's like this whole notion of humanizing people, even through their imperfections.
Right.
And so that's powerful. And that's powerful for the brothers. I hope you all are listening to that, because in all of us, first off, we're not perfect. But then the flip side of that, as we look at others, we look at our fathers, we look at our grandfathers, our cousins, our brothers, our siblings, our children. We look at other folks and we start this whole judgmental thing of them being imperfect. Even by them being imperfect, there's still lessons to be learned from them.
Right. And I think that what we see in our culture in particular is that there's grace extended to our mothers. Mm-hmm. The mothers don't have to be perfect, but mom is mom, and because mom is mom, we're always going to honor mom and give a shout out to mom whenever we become successful or achieve anything in life, with little acknowledgement of the father. And too often I think that society has reduced fathers, and black fathers in particular, to a paycheck. If you can't bring in the expected income, then you're relegated as being useless. And so what helped me to understand that it's not, you don't need to be perfect, but you need to be present, is when I became a father. And then I found out how challenging parenting is.
Yes.
And when I found out that I didn't have all of the answers, and I didn't have a detailed playbook. I have a playbook that gave me some guidance, but it didn't direct me and instruct me specifically in every situation, that I had to make some judgment calls. Sometime I made the wrong judgment call. And then I looked at my sons and I said, well, I hope that they don't have long-term, there's no long-term effect because of me not knowing exactly what to do in this situation. And so, or responding wrong, and then they witnessed a bad example in a given situation. And so then I said, well, I'm going to remain present. I want to be active in their life. And then part of my parenting is to also tell them how to correct any mistakes that they're going to make in their adult life, and as a father and a husband as well. So, I had to show some humility and say I was sorry to my children when I made some mistakes, especially my oldest, because I said, hey, I didn't know what I was doing, and you were the first, and we experimented on you.
Look, I'm the oldest, so I'm used to that. I had the earlier curfew. My younger brothers got away with whatever, but I was the one. I was the test dummy. So
right,
yeah, I understand.
Yeah, he was the test dummy, the guinea pig, and all of that. And so, I had to go back and tell him, I was wrong about this, or I probably should have handled this differently. But I wanted my boys to see that regardless of what happened in life, I was committed to their mother and I was committed to them. And that whenever they ran into challenges in life, that I was there as a support system and as a resource. And, it would be up to them as to whether or not they utilized me as such. But I didn't want my absence to be the result. To be the reason why they did not do better in life.
You wanted your presence to basically, you didn't want your absence to be that thing.
Yeah,
so it could be
right.
It might be my mistake, or it might be I might say something, do something, whatever. But it's not going to be the fact that I ain't here.
Right.
So,
yes.
And that's something I think we all need to be mindful of as well. So, question: you mentioned something that you wanted to apologize for you know, the way that things might have gone down, or the fact that maybe you didn't have all the answers. And I have a 4 and a 6-year-old right now, and it's interesting because, you know, obviously I don't have all the answers either. I can read all the books, I can listen to wisdom from brothers like yourself that have been where I'm going, but I still make mistakes as a father myself, and I think we all will. But what was it that gave you the insight and the wisdom to then go to your especially your older son and say, you know what, I might not have done this thing all right? Like, what was the inspiration for that? Because those are things that, like, for me as one with a 4 and a 6-year-old, I would like to kind of have the wisdom, the courage, or the inspiration to do that thing now, as opposed to waiting until, you know, they're late teenagers and say, hey, look, when you was 8 and I did this, I'm so sorry. You know, why not be able, what gives you that insight to be able to do that? Because I want to do that in the moment.
Yeah, well, first of all, my son, he's the one that brought some things to my attention. I knew when I had made a mistake, and then I didn't go back and explain it to him why I made the decision that I made. And it was something as simple as this. I remember I was working in yards and grounds for a pharmaceutical company, which meant I was in the blazing heat all day. When I would get home, my oldest son would want to, we lived in an apartment complex, he would want to go swimming. The last place I wanted to be was outside after being
You've been outside all day.
But I made a commitment to do that. And he was only 5 years old at the time. So I took him to the apartment complex pool. Once we got there, he wouldn't get in the water. So I, you know, being an inexperienced father, I'm thinking the way to get him over the fear of water is to throw him in the pool.
There you go. I knew where you were going.
So I threw him in the pool, and it traumatized him. It traumatized him in ways that I didn't realize until later. And then he brought that up one time. Now, he brought it up in a joking fashion, but I then responded to him serious because I wanted him to realize that that was a mistake on my part, and I don't know how that may have scarred you. And at that time he was a teenager, and I didn't want him to carry that around with him for the rest of his life, thinking, you know, believing that I thought I did the right thing, and then maybe he duplicate the experience with his children when I'm rethinking it and saying, hey, I wouldn't do that now, and then telling him how I wish I had gone about it, and been more patient, and just been a little bit more understanding when it came to his fear and apprehension of the water, and then kind of gradually break him into it. But based on my upbringing and my background, that's what we were taught to do. It's like,
and that's, you know what's fascinating, because when you see old school, or you hear old school scenarios of, you know, how did you learn how to swim? Well, my daddy just threw me into the deep end and I had to make it back to the side. Or, you know, it was like some generational things, or things that were done that maybe worked potentially, or maybe traumatize others. Because I mean, you know, the whole thing of a lot of people make jokes that black people can't swim. Maybe some of that stems from, you know, daddy's just saying, forget it, I'm gonna throw you in the deep end and see if you make it. I don't know, maybe that's it. It could be some other things. I know that's maybe a little funny there, but either way, it's interesting how things that we do that might have been, I guess, the cultural norm or norms for the time, then after we think about it later, they're like, all right, maybe we should rethink how we're doing this, because maybe that's not the best way to, you know, introduce them to something new. It's like, it's interesting how you bring that up, because I think that plays into a lot of how we operate.
Well, and let me elaborate on that, because this is what it taught me. You know, I threw him in the water, but I never took the time out to teach him how to swim. So I'm expecting him to do something that I never instructed him on how to do it. And so that translated over into my interaction with him. I said, you know what? I've discovered something about myself, and that is I have expectation prior to giving instruction.
Wow.
And so I would hold him accountable for things he wasn't even aware of. So I said, well, I need to instruct first and teach and train, and then when it comes to expectation, then you place the expectation on that, and then you can hold people accountable. But and you hear me say it at church from time to time with our children. I said, we expect them to act godly, but we fail to instill within them too often the word of God. So how can we expect them to do something that doesn't come natural for any of us? And so that's what I learned as a result of that is that I had to spend more time instructing, teaching, training, rather than being disappointed because they didn't meet my expectations when I didn't even.
You didn't even give them expectations to begin with.
Right.
That's so powerful, fellas. I hope you caught on to that. That's something that we tend to overlook. We have expectations without first instructing, training, and even modeling what those expectations should be. So how do we expect them to swim if we've never, gone through the whole notion of giving them swim lessons or showing them how to swim or playing in the water with them, but we just expect them to know how to do it? And that is powerful. Pay attention. Instruct, teach, and train before you then have expectations and then have accountability set up. You can't just make them accountable for something they don't even know what you're talking about. So that is powerful. Fellas, wisdom. This is Black Fathers Now. These are things that you can apply to your life right now. Don't overlook the instruction, the teaching, and the training. Don't just have expectations. Make sure you let them know what the expectations are and show them how to achieve them.
And
Powerful.
Mike, let me share this with you. I know we're talking about fatherhood, but before fatherhood, there should be holy matrimony.
There you go.
And when it comes to our children, young boys in particular, we need to train them up on how to love a woman. I think it was assumed that I knew how to love a woman because I was raised for the most part of my life
women.
by women, by a mother who was a single parent. And then I was the oldest of 4 children, and 3 of those were sisters. My siblings were sisters, and then I started preaching at a young age. I started preaching at 18, so I had the exposure to the Word of God. So I think that there was this assumption that I knew how, in a very practical way, apply the Word of God to my relationship with my wife. And after I was married, I found out I was clueless. And then I found out years later that my wife's way of thinking and her perception of life and the way she approaches life is totally different from mine.
Wow.
Because men and women, surprisingly enough, in our society, are different.
They are. Very much.
We're very, and so, and just real quick, I had to teach my boys, if you're engaged in a conversation with another man, and if he says, no, I don't want this, you can pretty much bank on the fact
there you
that
go. It's a done
his
deal.
no means no. With a woman, you cannot always assume that what she said is what she needs or even what she wants. You have to listen to and look for what's not being stated. It goes back to some of the seasoned saints telling me, if you come in the house and your wife is going off about the trash, it ain't the trash.
There is something else. I love it. You got to pay attention to all the other clues that are associated. But to your point, you have to, if that has not been modeled to you, if you have not had, that type of interaction present for you in your household or, something close to you that you can kind of witness and understand, then that whole interaction is completely foreign. And it's foreign to a lot of brothers. If you didn't grow up and you didn't have your mother and father or a mother and father type figure there modeling that type of interaction and you've never seen it, the first time it shows up, you're just like, stuff is hitting the fan. What is this? Yeah. I don't, and so to your point, it's so important. Important to see that.
Mike, one of the main things that helped me, now my father was present. I mean that in the sense that I lived with my father and mother when they were married for a brief period of time. And then they divorced. But although they divorced, he was still active in my life. But he wasn't in the household.
Gotcha.
And so I didn't have that consistent modeling and example. So you know who made the difference during the absence of my biological father?
Who?
My spiritual father. Who intentionally and in his own sovereign way placed people in my life to help teach me biblical principles that I needed and that I still utilize today. So, we're talking about black fathers now, but our black fathers need to be connected to the spiritual father who has a son.
That's right.
Named Jesus Christ. So that's been a very, very important aspect of my life. And my interactions and relationships with my wife and with my children, and now my grandchildren, who I see as a second opportunity to get it right, to improve upon my parenting skills and to learn from some of the mistakes that I made as a younger man, and now, instilling this spiritual legacy in another generation.
Fellas, literally, in the absence of your actual father in a worldly sense, there is a spiritual father that's available. And for Pastor Wakefield, that's where he legitimately relied upon to help guide his trek throughout life. And so that's definitely something that we have to think about. And a lot of the issues that we have in our community stem from that lack of connection as well. So we might not have a connection with our physical father, but then if you also don't have a connection with the spiritual father, then, where is that leadership coming from within your life? What is, I used to use a quote, spiritual conviction leads to mental commitment. Mental commitment leads to taking action. So becoming spiritually convicted, and then you being able to take mental action, basically having a the mental wherewithal to take action, then things kind of line up in the proper place. And so if you don't have that spiritual connection and you don't have the physical connection, what's going on and what's being modeled in your life? And so you're then kind of set up to just figure it out on your own. And we need help. We all do. I don't care who you are. We all need help. And so,
although gangs are not a positive aspect of our community, that's generally where a lot of young men get the help from, because they are there to fill that void. They will provide protection. Sometimes they'll provide resources. It all comes at a tremendous price, and a tremendous cost. But that's why we need to be present, to protect our young men, to instruct and direct them in particular, and protect our young ladies, and to give, to be present and to help them in ways that they need to be helped and advised and protected from those individuals that we need to keep them from.
That's right. And so, and you and I talked a couple of days ago about this, and you mentioned there was a unique story that you had the privy of writing, and an experience that kind of was connected to that in early adulthood. Talk a little bit about that, because I think this is actually a powerful situation.
Yeah, when I was a young adult living in Evansville, Indiana, I had the opportunity to write a monthly newspaper article. And this particular month was the month of June, and I wanted to honor my father. But I was very transparent in the article, and I shared with the readers some of the flaws and the mistakes that he made and the bad choices that he made. And I shared that just to give them context. And I wanted them to know, especially if someone was reading the article who also knew my father and was aware of his struggles. I wanted them to see that I was not trying to make him out to be someone he wasn't, but this was my way of honoring him by saying I choose not to emphasize the negative aspects of his life, but I want to honor him for these reasons. And I just shared with them that, number one, he was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, but in light of his sickness, or in spite of it, he was still a better father than many who don't deal with those medical issues. He would make sure if I had an appointment to get to, or some activity at school, although he didn't own a car at the time, he would make it happen. He was resourceful. He would borrow someone's automobile, come by our home, pick me or my siblings up, make sure that we were where we needed to be, and not only there, but on time. And he just taught me to be responsible in that way. And so although he wasn't able to financially support us the way I believe that he wanted to, he did other things to try and make up for that. And to give you another example, because of his medical condition, it often prohibited him or interfered with him gaining or having gainful employment. But he's good with his hands, and so I found out he was painting someone's home. I thought he was doing it in secret because he knew he owed back child support, and I didn't think he wanted my mother to know about the money that he was making, and so he never made us aware of this job opportunity that he had. So I waited to see what was going to happen. He painted the house, and then and it wasn't a large home, but say for instance he made $100. I don't remember the exact amount he made, but I do remember this part. After he made the $100, he came to us and gave us 75 of it. So more than half, because he understood his responsibility, and he knew that what he gave us wasn't what he owed in back child support, but he knew that although he needed more to live off of than what he kept for himself, he loved us, and he understood the responsibility of fatherhood and parenting, and he gave us the lion's share of his income that he made for that particular week. And so those things being modeled for me go a long way. So when it comes to my wife and I hope you've noticed that when we pull up at the church, my wife always drives the better car.
That's right.
Because I wanted her to have the most reliable transportation when it came to her and transporting my children. If anybody was going to drive the hoopty, I would drive.
That's right.
When it comes to how we dress, hopefully you notice that my children and my wife dress better than I do. Because if anybody's going to make the sacrifice or give up anything, it would be me for them. And I don't expect my children to make sacrifices for me when I'm responsible for them being here.
That's right, 100%. And so you mentioned you wrote about those examples in the newsletter article, and you also mentioned that there were some unique responses to that article that you wrote.
Yeah, unfortunately, there was a woman that read the article and she was offended by it, and she felt like I was trying to honor somebody who wasn't worth honoring. But I had to share with her in a one-on-one interaction that this was my father and this is the way I feel about him. This was personal for me. And I do believe that there are other people who have to allow for the mistakes of your parents, in this case my father in particular, allow for those mistakes and those imperfections, and remain true to the Word of God, because there's no exceptions. It says honor your mother and your father. They may not be the people you want them to be. They may not always do what you expect them to do, but we are still to honor them. And I believe that honor will then come to you in return. And when we are in that place of parenting, then maybe that will give us a better understanding as to why their example wasn't so perfect, because ours is not going to be perfect either. But we still want to be honored and respected as parents if we've tried to fulfill that responsibility faithfully. And I felt that he did the best that he could, considering the circumstances, to fulfill that responsibility faithfully. And so we still have a great relationship. I talked to him just the other day, and I try to be very intentional in maintaining that relationship with him. And he gave me insightful advice even the other day when I was telling him, I'm toward the tail end of my life and headed toward retirement, and he was telling me to prepare now for later, and he's very respectful in the way he shares it. He says, I'm not trying to tell you what to do, and I'm not trying to get in your personal business, but, it would be prudent on your part to do this in preparation for, I'm 52 now. And he said, but when you turn 72. And I said, I accept that, receive that, and appreciate it, and thank you for that information. But to me, that's an expression of love, care, and concern that I shouldn't write off because he didn't make adequate preparation for the tail end of his life, But I think he's looking through the eyes of his own personal experience and saying, hey, do better than I did and than what I've done. And that's the way I'm looking at my children. hopefully you will do better than what I was able to do, and we will continue to improve our legacy.
It's a stair step, man. I mean, if you are a father, I think in the movie Black Panther, you know, the quote that was so powerful from the king to King T'Challa's father, the one that had passed away, when he met him, and basically they had a conversation, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something to the extent that if a father has not prepared his child for him being gone, then he has not done his job as a father. And so it's like the whole concept of, if I have not done my job of preparing you, you know, for when I am gone, I've not done my job as a father. And so, fellas, when we think about our lives and we think about our own imperfections, our own issues, our own things that we are struggling and dealing with, we cannot overlook the fact that as fathers, we have to prepare our children for when we are not here. So what are we doing right now to set the stage for that to happen? What type of actions, what type of things are we modeling within our lives? And what's interesting, when you go back to Derick Wakefield's example from when he was 10, and he made the commitment that he was not going to allow other people's perspectives or perceptions to taint his love for or his honoring of his father, how that kind of came back into play in his young adulthood in writing this article for the newsletter, in a sense that, you know, he was challenged because somebody then was like, why are you honoring this guy who, quote unquote, does not deserve to be honored? But then I look back to the chronological thought process here, in the sense that at 10, he made the commitment to not allow somebody else's perspective to taint his own image of his father. And now he was able to put that into practice. And so little things like that, we have to sometimes put blinders on to other people's perspectives and viewpoints, because they might not be coming from the right place. And so, and realize that, fellas, we're all imperfect, but we all have a story. We all still have value, even in the midst of our imperfections.
Yeah. And a lot of times fathers make tremendous sacrifices that are never acknowledged by others. And that's why I try to be very intentional in doing so, because, I mean, it's even happened in my immediate family. And I don't think it's intentional by any means, but I could see, I mean, my boys, you know, will sometimes run by me to greet mama and to commend her. And that's fine with me. But I do want to change that, because they're going to be, well, one's already a father, and my youngest son will be a father, you know, hopefully one day. And they're going to strive or desire to have that type of a relationship with their children, where their children appreciate their presence, but also appreciate and acknowledge the sacrifices that were made for them, you know. And so when I look back over my life, I see where my father, where he did make sacrifices, where he instructed me well, where he taught me not to lie, to be a person of character, not to steal, to go about trying to provide for me and my family by doing honest work and not breaking the law. I mean, he taught me those things. Now, he wasn't so good in the area of financial responsibility. But even with that, I think he knew that, and he didn't allow that to discourage him
from trying.
And from keeping in contact with us, because he could have just, out of embarrassment and shame, just said, well, because I don't have any money to give, I'll be conveniently absent, because I don't want to deal with the criticism that comes with that. But he dealt with the criticism and still engaged and interacted with us and was present in our lives. And I'm thankful for that. I see children who have never met their father and the devastating effects that it's had upon them. I can't begin to imagine, you know, how they feel. A lot of them struggle with the sense of identity. Well, I have a sense of identity. I know who my father is, and I thank God for the positive examples that he has set or taught me, set in my life, and the things that he's taught me. And then I learned from the mistakes that he made. And so I'm thankful for that versus, you know, not having him around at all.
Fellas, Fellas, powerful. And I mean, at this point, I mean, what specific, do you have any specific advice, some specific just wisdom that, you know, the brothers can take and apply to their lives right now based on your experience, based on, you know, your story, just based on anything? I mean, is there anything that you'd like to leave the brothers with that they can kind of apply to their life right now? This is Black Fathers Now, so we want them to leave with something that they can apply to their lives right now.
There are some things that they probably want to know or wish they were taught that would have helped them with their adult experiences. Whatever you feel like those deficiencies are, whatever information that wasn't passed on, begin passing them on to your children at the youngest age possible. Don't wait until they're adults or young adults or even teenagers and then try to instruct them in this game called life. Begin as soon as possible. I remember my children were knee-high to a grasshopper, and I said, this is the order and sequence of events. Before you can date a female, you have to have a job because she's a female. She's a male with a fee, F-E-E. It costs
Message.
It costs you money.
There you go. Message.
to date a woman, and then hopefully you have the intentions of marrying her, and then if you have children, it's going to cost a significant amount of money to take care of you, her, and those children, and everything else that comes with a household. So you need to have a job first. Or more importantly, you need to have a relationship with Christ intact first. Then you need to have a job. You need to, and then look for a spouse. And so I just try to share that with them. And oddly enough, my youngest son, he resisted a little bit the job piece when he was in high school. Because I made both of my sons start working at the age of 15. And my youngest, we talked about it recently and we laughed about it because at the age of 15, I said, okay, it's time for you to get a job. And he told me he had one. And I scratched my head. I said, what job do you have? He said, I go to school. I said, I understand that. I understand that, but you need another job that creates a source of income. And he was disturbed with that. You know, he's a basketball fiend. So he said, well, I play basketball. I said, well, if basketball is going to get in the way of you making an honest living by way of working at the age of 15, you might have to come off the team. And of course, he didn't like that response, but he ended up finding a job at 15 when he was I think a freshman in high school, maybe a sophomore. And he kept that one job throughout the entire time he was in school, and he learned to manage school, athletics, and his job that whole time. So then when he went to college, he called me. He said, I appreciate you for making me work at the age of 15 because now I have peers who are 19 and in school and are afraid because they don't know how they're going to make it. And I hear myself saying to them what you said to me, and that is, get a job.
Wow.
Because their expectation was for someone else to meet, to provide for them the other things that they would need, such as toiletry items and hygiene items and stuff like that. But it was instilled in him at a young age, and so he wasn't afraid when he went to school to be a little financially independent and to handle responsibility so that he could stay for the 4 years that he intended to stay to achieve the degree to set him up for his vocation. And so he's done, both of them have done well. They are hard workers, and I thank God for that. But he was the one that struggled with the job thing. And so now he's known for his work ethic. And he's done a great job. And he sees now the value in all of that. But if we had backed off of that, you know, and women who are single parents need to understand that a man needs to work.
Yes.
You know, and you shouldn't keep them from that, thinking that you're helping them. But as a result of that, I think that has contributed to many of my sons' successes in life, and even helped them through their struggles.
So, fellas, don't wait. Don't wait. I don't care how young your kids are. Don't wait to start modeling, to start putting wisdom out there for them to, to apply, to utilize, even if they give you some pushback, even if they resist it. And that's hard for me. Like I said, I have a 4 and a 6-year-old. And so when we instruct something to happen, sometimes we get some resistance. But at the end of the day, especially if you're coming from the right place, you're coming with something that's going to help them, they will ultimately get it. And it's going to take some time. It's going to take a little bit of patience, but eventually they'll probably come back to you and tell you how much they appreciate you staying on them about something that was for their benefit. Yeah. So, well, fellas, we definitely have to thank my man, Pastor Derick Wakefield, for coming on today. Hey, if folks wanted to get in contact with you, if they want to follow you, if they want to see you, what's the best way to do so? Is it social media? Is it coming to the church? I mean, what's the best way to kind of get in touch with you here, Pastor Wakefield, here in Knoxville, Tennessee?
Well, I do have a Facebook page, and it's Derick, Derick, Wakefield. So you can friend me on Facebook, or you can contact me through the church. The church number is, it's Freedom Fellowship Christian Church, 4027 Papermill Drive, Knoxville, Tennessee, 37909. And our number is 865-212-3450. And we have a website. It's freedomknoxville.org. So you can, or email me, ffcc@comcast.net. FFCC is for Freedom Fellowship Christian Church @comcast.net. So any of those means, you should be able to get in contact with me.
Awesome. And we're going to have all that information in the show notes so you all can get in contact with Pastor Wakefield. Come check out a service on Sunday morning. Just reach out to him, man. It's a dynamic brother with a really cool story. So y'all definitely reach out. And we want to thank you, my man, for coming on and sharing your story, man. This is awesome.
9 a.m. for the service.
Yeah,
that's a non-traditional time.
Yeah, now if you're going to come check out service, if you're ever in Knoxville, definitely 9 a.m. on Sunday morning. Come check us out, man, and say hello. And if you reach out to him on social media or email or whatever, let him know you heard about him on Black Fathers Now. And that's pretty awesome, man. So we really want to thank you for taking time to share with us. And fellas, as always, visit blackfathersnow.com. You can subscribe to the podcast via iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio. Any way you listen to podcasts, definitely subscribe, leave comments, share this out with other brothers who are looking to be the best fathers that they can be in life. And leave some ratings. That helps us to rise in all the different search things across the board. And this episode is brought to you by blackfamilyapparel.com. Visit blackfamilyapparel.com to grab some awesome apparel that celebrates the nuances of the black family. And fellas, until next time, y'all be blessed, well, and wise. And I'll holler at you. Peace.
Yo, fellas, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And always visit blackfathersnow.com, as well as follow Black Fathers Now on virtually every social media platform you can think of. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, everywhere. Just follow us and engage with us, man. Look forward to hearing from you. And I guess until next time, I'll holler at you. Peace.